Welcome to Wild Side, your wild true crime podcast.
We're your hosts, who are sisters, storytellers, and truth seekers.
I'm Bailey, a therapist who is fascinated by all weird and dark human behaviors.
And I'm Chelsea, an educator here to unearth the facts behind the cases.
We cover true crime because some cases are just too dark to forget,
and others are too wild to ignore.
We're so glad you're here, so buckle up
and enjoy the ride.
What's up? What's up?
I was seeing a thing the other day, and they were talking about right now with the middle school culture, and even in high school, that's the 6-7, right? 6-7, and and everybody's like, that's so weird, and we didn't do weird stuff. And then like the next meme is like everybody doing what's up, what's up, what's up. So I mean, it's all of us, right?
Well, you remember the just Josh and ya? Like everybody has their sayings. I got told the other day, talk about being put in your place. So I work with elementary age kids at this point in time. And this kid said something and I corrected him. He was just like, do you know, Miss B, do you know who you remind me of? I was like, who? He was like the meme where you like push up the glasses and you go, well, actually. And I was like, asshole, I didn't say that.
Sure. Yeah. No, I was holding a door open for a kid, a middle school kid, and said, I can't really remember exactly what happened, but I was like, oh, epic fail. And he said, I'm sorry, no offense, ma'am, but you really don't understand our slang. And then walked off. And I was like, okay, all right. So, yeah.
Whatever. Be like, I am hip to the hip hop. Okay, so on a different note, so we have a cool interview dropping next week. Chelsea wasn't a part of it, so it'll be just as surprising to her as it will be for you guys, for y'all listeners, because she, I don't know, had some really important stuff to do. And it is going to be an interview with a criminal side of it, with a hijacker. His PR reached out and we did the interview. Nice guy. Definitely he's anti-therapy, and you'll hear that in the episode. But I did get hit on, and the older you get, the less you get hit on. I was pretty proud of that. I mean, so I'm just gonna leave it at that. So you guys will hear it. We left it in the interview on purpose.
Hey man, take what you can get. It's a good day in the hood.
Yeah, so we're gonna drop that probably next week, you guys, and then Chelsea and I, just like every other human in the world, probably gonna take a couple weeks off for Christmas and New Year's. We might spoil y'all with a short side or two in those 2 weeks. And they might be like extra short sides if we, do one. But that's just to give you an update.
Well, I'm excited to jump into part 2 of old Marky Hopkinson.
Oh, Mark.
What's Mark up to right now in part 2?
We're going to find out. But before we start getting into the rest of the case, we're going to do a recap because there was a week between last week and this week. And so here's just a quick recap on what we covered in part 1. So Mark Hopkinson is the main guy. He grew up in Wyoming's Bridger Valley, spent most of his life kind of on the wrong side of the law. After a federal drug conviction in the early 70s, he returned home to the Bridger Valley area and became entangled in this weird water and sewer dispute with the Royts family and attorney Vincent Behar. That conflict escalated into threats, extortion, and finally a deadly bombing that killed Vincent, his wife Beverly, and their son John. Meanwhile, Another secret was festering: the 76 murder of the 15-year-old girl Kelly Wickhuse, carried out by Mark's associate Mike Hickey. And that was covered up with Mark's help. So remember, there's like 3,000 stories going on at once. And then when investigators started looking into local burglaries and Kelly's disappearance, when that all kind of collided, Mark Hopkinson pushed his buddies, Mike Hickey and Jeff Green, to frame a young troublemaker, Jamie Heisel. And that worked until it didn't. And so kind of towards the end of episode 1, there was Heisel's trial, where Jeff Green finally broke and confessed that Hickey was the one who killed Kelly, and also that Mark Hopkinson was actually the one who orchestrated the bombings. So it reopened the earlier case, the 1977 incident where Jeff Green had been pulled over with a bomb in Mark's car over in Utah. Federal prosecutors took over, and then in 1979, Mark was convicted in that attempted bombing plot, the Mariscal bombing plot, and sent to the U.S. Penitentiary in the land of mispronunciations, Lompoc, California. So where we ultimately ended part 1, Mark Hopkinson was physically behind bars, but still orchestrating schemes, making tons of phone calls, and closing in on the one person who could finally destroy him, which was Jeff Green.
By May of 1979, Jeff Green wasn't just one of Mark Hopkinson's guys anymore. He was a liability, a young man with a conscience, with information, and with a growing fear that he'd gotten in far too deep, far too much over his head. He'd already testified in the Mariscal bombing case, and now, in just a matter of days, a federal grand jury was scheduled to dig into the Vehar bombing and Mark's entire network of crimes. Jeff was expected to be a key witness, and Mark obviously knows this. And as we established last week, if you're not with Mark, you're against Mark in every form of that statement, right? So witnesses later said Mark had already warned Jeff's sister that he would quote unquote get Jeff for turning on him. Meanwhile, from Lompoc Federal Prison, the calls kept coming. Again, I'm pretty sure that these are collect calls. I will die on that hill. They are spending lots of money to orchestrate this. On May 16th, Mark asked where Jeff was, and Jennifer, if we remember her from last week's episode, told him that Jeff was in Iowa. On May 17th, he called again. This time, Jennifer told him Jeff would be coming home in the next couple of days. What she didn't realize was that these weren't casual check-ins. They were a countdown. He pretty much was trying to get as much precise information as he could. Jeff and his mother returned late that night from Iowa, fresh from a family funeral. And the next morning, May 18th, Jeff walked out the door with 2 men and never came back. Yeah, let that sink in for a bit. The last confirmed sighting placed him in a white pickup-style truck, a detail investigators would later tie to earlier run-ins involving men in Mark's orbit.
Just a few days later, on May 20th, 1979, just after sunrise, a man walking his dog, and it's always people walking their dogs. It's like every episode, it's people walking their dogs and stumble onto this horrific thing.
It's almost like no good deed goes unpunished.
Yeah. So again, just after sunrise, a man walking his dog near a rest stop outside Fort Bridger stumbled into a nightmare. There, face down in the dirt, lay the nude, mutilated body of a young man. He had been shot once in the back of the head, but everything else that had been done to him was almost beyond comprehension. When a medical examination took place, medical examiners documented about 140 burn injuries alone. Cigarette burns pressed deep into the skin and muscle. Knife wounds across this man's chest and arms. Third-degree burns on his elbows. Burns on his fingers, knuckles, and the webbing between them. His face and scalp had also been burned. A hot metal tool, possibly a soldering iron, had been used to blind the man as well. One of his eyes was burned out entirely, the other severely damaged. The body was tied up, and it was clear that he fought against the restraints, leaving marks. Many of the injuries were inflicted while he was still alive, so this was torture. Some of the burns, medical examiners noted, were shaped like the letter T, and investigators interpreted it as one word: traitor. Whoever was in the room with this man, who would later be identified as Jeff Green, whoever was in the room with him wanted him to suffer and wanted this to be a warning that betrayal had a price, and that price was a life. You know, I just can't help but notice that this, to me, tracks perfectly with Mark Hopkinson's worldview. Jeff Green had threatened Mark's identity, his power, his myth, and torture became the language that Mark used to rewrite the story. Even though Mark never physically touched Jeff, because remember, he's in prison, that night the murderer carried the psychological signature, the timing, the symbolism, the overkill. It was a killing that was executed to communicate.
And here's the part that honestly still gives me chills. Jeff's body was found 2 days before he was scheduled to testify in front of a federal grand jury about the Veyer bombing. This, of course, was not random. It wasn't a coincidence, and everyone knew it. This was a message broadcast across the entire valley that pretty much said, if you talk, this is what happens. In a rural community, especially one as tight-knit as Bridger Valley, murders don't really stay contained to the crime scene. They really crawl through the social networks. They become warnings whispered at dinner tables and gas stations and school parking lots, right? The whole town is buzzing with this. Mark had spent years building power through intimidation. And Jeff's murder really was the megaphone that amplified it. And honestly, this, I think, is the moment the case stopped being a feud, stopped being a rumor mill, stopped being a local issue. This was the moment state and federal authorities had no choice but to fully engage. Jeff's murder transformed Mark from a dangerous hometown bully into really something that was unpredictable. Who could predict something as horrendous as this? A man orchestrating torture and execution from inside a federal prison? I mean, this guy has got to be stopped.
And then the financial trail started to show itself, the part that prosecutors would later describe as the spine of the case. On May 21st of that year, 1979, the day after Jeff Green's body was found, $15,000 suddenly appeared in Christy King's bank account. It did not match her income. It did not match any legitimate source. But it did match deposits traced back to Mark Hopkinson's associates. So the next day, Christy got a call from a man who identified himself only as Joe. He asked whether she received $20,000 yet. When she told him that she'd only received $15,000, he grew irritated and told her he would meet her at the airport to collect it. And that's where Christy really started to panic. A few days later, on May 25th, Mark called her again from prison. At this point, she told him she wanted out. This was too big, she was in over her head, and she planned to send the money back to his mother. And Mark very easily said, no, send it to Scott. Christy bought 3 $5,000 cashier's checks and mailed them to Mark's brother, Scott Hopkinson. And those transactions became a key piece of the prosecution's theory that Jeff Green's murder wasn't just ordered remotely, it was also paid for remotely from a prison phone through Christy King's bank account into Scott's hands. Money in and murder out. So once the money trail surfaced, once Jeff Green's torture, the timing, the threats, and the financial transfers all converged, this is when things started to shift even more. The federal grand jury began closing in. Witnesses who had stayed silent for a long time slowly started to talk. Old crimes started to resurface. Rumors started to harden the testimony. And the fragile social alliances that Mark Hopkinson had held together with fear really started to crack. And this is where the case starts to really transform into indictments, confessions, and really, at the center of it, the unraveling of Mark's inner circle, starting with the man who finally breaks under pressure, and that is Mike Hickey.
Jeff Green's murder didn't just add another body to the growing trail behind Mark Hopkinson. It collapsed the entire criminal ecosystem that he had built. For years, Mark kept his circle intact with intimidation, favors, manipulations. Pretty much, if he could get something out of you, he would figure out a way to do it. And a carefully crafted illusion of loyalty. Again, if you're with me, you're good. If you're against me, you better watch out. Mark had always been the buffer, the stabilizer, the one who had kept Hickey tethered to Mark. But when Jeff was killed, that stabilizing force disappeared. What remained was fear, suspicion, and a federal spotlight brighter than anything Bridger Valley had ever experienced. Investigators already had their doubts about Mark. Now, with a witness dead and evidence stacking up, every old rumor resurfaced like sediment stirred in deep water. A federal grand jury convened, and suddenly the local power Mark wielded so effortlessly meant nothing. The first to feel the pressure was Mike Hickey. Hickey had always been the enforcer, the follower, not the strategist, the man who confused fear with loyalty and approval with identity. But when he was summoned before the Uintah County grand jury, the protections he relied on for years evaporated. No Mark, no favors, no small town safety net. Just a big old federal room, an oath, and the real possibility of spending the rest of his life in prison.
You guys know that I can't help but look at the psychological piece. And for Mike Hickey, this is exactly where we would expect the facade to start to crack. He was not the mastermind. Remember, he came from a pretty well-known ranching family. He was impulsive, guilt-ridden, and deeply dependent on stronger personalities to anchor his identity. So, under sustained pressure, especially the legal piece, the emotional piece, and the existential, people like Mike Hickey really start to hit an overload cognitively. So when Hickey stepped into that grand jury room, what he expected was routine questions about Jeff Green's murder. Instead, they laid into him. Stripped of Mark's presence and protection, the weight became just really too unbearable, and the dam just bust. Hickey confessed to everything. He admitted to killing 15-year-old Kelly Wycuse. He admitted he built and threw the bomb into the Veyer home. He admitted that Mark Hopkinson had ordered each act, from the murder of the teenage girl to the explosion that destroyed an entire family. And Hickey gave details only the bomber could have known: the timing, the route, the fuse length, the pressure from Mark, and the final command just hours before detonation. In one moment, Hickey didn't just confess. He became the state's star witness. And so prosecutors moved fast, really, really fast. And what they decided to do was to offer old Hickey a plea deal. And the whole purpose of this, one purpose and one purpose alone, was to take down Mark Hopkinson. So the terms of the plea deal were stark, but somewhat merciful compared to what Hickey had faced. 20 years for the second-degree murder of Kelly Wickhuse, a concurrent sentencing for maiming Tony Vehar, the only survivor of the blast, and full immunity for the Vehar bombing when testifying against Mark. This was the deal that flipped it all upside down.
Hickey's confession, it didn't just make news. It shattered the Valley's perception of social law and order. For decades, Mark Hopkinson had been the man no one crossed, the name spoken with caution, right? But now, for the first time, he wasn't being accused by rumor or suspicion. He was being named by the man who carried out his orders. And once Hickey broke, everything broke. For prosecutors, this was the breakthrough they had chased for nearly 2 years, a direct, irrefutable link between Mark and the violence. And the shift in Bridger Valley was immediate. Mark's influence had stretched across the valley for years through construction contracts, family ties, favors, fears. But overnight, he went from the hunter to the hunted. Within days of Hickey's confession, the grand jury issued sweeping indictments against Mark Hopkinson. The murders of Vincent, Beverly, and John Vehar, the torture murder of Jeff Green, multiple conspiracy charges, and a series of related violent crimes. What started as a petty water dispute, a sewer board argument, a few threats, a couple $100, had evolved into one of the most expansive criminal takedowns in the state of Wyoming's history.
You know, as we were going through this, I was just really interested because, and we come across this a lot, but how things tend to backfire for people. And, you know, one thing that our dad, I remember in my brain, I don't know, Chelsea, if you have the same memory, but one thing that I will forever remember from the teachings of my dad is he would always say, don't get greedy. He was very big on like, don't overextend, don't get greedy. And I can't help but think in this case, when Mark ordered the killing of Jeff Green, I think that that was a catastrophic backfire for him. He believed that eliminating Jeff would kind of silence everything, right? Silence the threat. But instead, I think it made people realize just how dangerous he was and how quickly they needed to deal with him. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I think it's one of those, when you attack the other side, then people can rally behind you, like the perceivable, you know, our side versus their side. But when you attack your own side, which is essentially, I think, what he did by attacking someone in his inner circle, I mean, people, you can't handle that. You can't trust it. It just needs to be stopped, because that's dangerous, right? That's fatal. That's next level. Like, even for somebody who has compromised morals, I think even at that point, people always have that line in the sand. And I think Jeff Green was that line in the sand.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's also the point in time where there was a notable, like, you see this a lot in societies, right? So in communities, right? Jeff's death marked that moment when Bridger Valley shifted from silence being hushed, being feared, or being fearful to cooperating. Once one insider breaks, once someone proves Mark is not invincible, or that Mark could be taken down, that he's just a dude, the fear barrier cracks. Witnesses become more willing, law enforcement gains momentum. So it's just amazing how you'll have this roadblock of a situation where nobody's talking, nobody's wanting to step forward. And then, like you said, Bailey, you get that crack in the dam, things just start gushing, right? And small town isolation no longer shields the offender. The circle was broken, the silence was broken, and I think people were just sick, right? They were getting sick of being bullied, and the Hopkinson trial, the most explosive one, again, like we keep saying, in Wyoming history, I mean, it was just no longer avoidable, but ultimately I think people were just done.
Yeah, I mean, that's what happens when they start to push back, you know what I mean? And one important thing to note here, and it was kind of one of those things where we didn't really know where to plug this in because there wasn't like a smooth way to make this all fit. But in regard to Jeff Green's murder, fast forward years later in the 80s, 1987, authorities would end up charging a man by the name of Alvin Hap Russell and Todd Hall with aiding and abetting first-degree murder and conspiracy in Jeff Green's death. Now, there was also a third man, Jeff Dunn, was initially charged, though the case against him was dropped for lack of evidence. By the 90s, in 1990, Alvin Hap Russell was convicted and sentenced to life plus additional years for allegedly serving as the intermediary between Mark and the actual killers. His conviction was overturned in 93, and he ended up dying of a heart attack in 97 while awaiting trial or retrial. So all of this to say, to this day, the two men who they believe it was two men based off of the brutality of the murder, the two men who physically abducted, tortured, and killed Jeff Green have never been definitively identified or convicted. And I just, there's so many people in this web, and Chelsea and I say it all the time, is if people would just talk, you know what I mean? If they would just talk, then Jeff Green's family could get, I hate using the word closure, but some sort of understanding of who was responsible for this, because we know Mark didn't do it. He was incarcerated. But there are two other killers out there who violently and horrifically tortured and killed Jeff Green.
I get it, right? People might think that, does it really make a difference if they know who it is or not? But to me, identifying people who could do this is potentially stopping something else from happening. Because if they could do it to this person, who's to say they wouldn't do it to somebody else? Because that is next level. This is not just a random, he was shot and that was it. To be tortured to that level, for your eyes to be poked and burned out, I mean, Bailey, that's horrifying. And to not know who did this, and the fact that they're more than likely just living their lives in the public, I don't know, that doesn't sit well with me.
Yeah, I mean, it's horrifying. It really is. And so, okay, we talked a little bit about that. Now we're going to rewind again back to September of 1979. Okay. The trial of Mark Hopkinson didn't and couldn't take place in Bridger Valley. Kind of, thank goodness. There was no possible way to seat a safe or impartial jury in the very community he had terrorized for years. Too many people were frightened. Too many witnesses had been threatened. One private investigator had to obtain a concealed carry permit simply to continue working the case. So they were just like, no, we can't have a jury here. So the state ended up moving the trial to Jackson, Wyoming, which, of course, is a town far removed from the Hopkinson sphere of influence. And even there, the court implemented unprecedented security measures. So Arguably, at this time, it wasn't just another homicide trial. This was the prosecution of what was considered at the time the most dangerous defendant Wyoming had ever faced. And into the courtroom walked famed defense attorney Jerry Spence. Clad in his iconic buckskin jacket, when he addressed the jury, he didn't hold back. The facts we will produce will show, I believe, the most heinous and unbelievable series of murders that have ever been committed in the history of this state. And across the next several weeks, Spence delivered exactly what he promised. Prosecutor Jerry Spence walked the jury through the recruitment and manipulation of Mike Hickey and Jeff Green. He detailed the intimidation of the sewer board, the attempted bribery of witnesses, and failed assassination plots. He reconstructed the bombing of the Veyer home and the awful torture murder of Jeff Green, and noting that this was the killing that ultimately unraveled everything. He showed receipts, phone logs, bank transfers, letters, even the yearbook photo mailed out. Every breadcrumb returned to one source, Mark Hopkinson, the guy directing violence from inside federal prison. And this is exactly what we were talking about earlier. Why killing a witness is considered one of the most severe acts in criminal law. It represents instrumental violence. So not just a moment of anger, but a strategic decision to obstruct justice. And it illustrates a dangerousness that isn't situational, but systemic. And in Mark Hopkinson's case, arguably the most chilling detail is he was already in federal custody when Jeff Green was murdered. And like we said before, to judges and juries, that signals a risk profile that just can't be contained. If someone can orchestrate killings from behind bars, what possible structure could restrain them?
You know, all communities experience crime and violence and different things differently, right? Communities experience death penalty cases differently when the violence has expanded beyond their control. And in this case, Mark wasn't just a criminal, he was a destabilizing force who bent an entire region into silence. Many locals viewed his trial and the possibility of execution not as retribution, but as a restoration of safety. And I think that's a really important way to look at this, because I know that can be a really hot topic. But I think it's important to take the viewpoint of the community that they felt it was a restoration of safety for their community. For decades, Mark Hopkinson manipulated reputations, leveraged family influence, and intimidated anyone who challenged him. But that version of Mark evaporated the moment he stood before a jury who owed him nothing. And then came the most stunning moment of the entire trial. Mark presented no defense. No witnesses, no evidence, no counter narrative. When asked why, he simply said the state, quote, hadn't proved anything. I mean, seriously? Like, I'm sorry, Bailey. I'm hoping that you can give a little bit of insight. I'm wanting to lean towards words like narcissism or gaslighting or some of these trending words. What the heck is this?
I mean, y'all know I have to be really careful. Like, I can't diagnose people and say that they're this or they're that because I have an active license, right? So I have to be super, super careful. But like everything about Mark's behavior points to what's called malignant narcissism. So you have like fragile narcissists and malignant narcissists. Fragile narcissists are just what it implies, is they're very fragile. You have to be very careful with these ones because if you challenge them, they just like internally, they kind of crumble and, like, you're a bitch and you don't understand me and blah, blah, blah. The difference with malignant narcissism or malignant narcissists is there is a form of almost like delusion around them. Like more than just confidence, it's almost delusion. It's like they are incapable of acknowledging weaknesses, when they're wrong, when they're vulnerable. And so for him in this instance, if you look at what narcissists really struggle with, which is inside, they're like wounded little boys who can't acknowledge that there's anything weak or not powerful about them. And it's like intolerable for them, right? So even in this case for Mark, even as the evidence buried him, he just believed that he could still outmaneuver the system. And we have to remember that he had been positively reinforced behaviorally for decades, right? And so there's that piece, but this is arguably why people were so afraid of him and why he was so dangerous, because he just was almost delusional with his belief in getting away with what he wanted to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, because, again, I know we've talked about in so many of our episodes where you kind of, I think as somebody who listens to something like this, you're like, I would never, right? I would stand up. Speaking of things that we were taught growing up, our mom was real big on like, you've got to stand up to bullies. She was real big on stand up for yourself, but that really puts it in a different light, like presenting Mark, again, with the possibility that he could have possibly been a malignant narcissist. It does shed some light as to why people were genuinely afraid of him. Because when you're dealing with somebody who their reality doesn't match everybody else's reality, that's a scary, scary place to be, especially if he is malicious, right?
Yeah,
or dangerous,
absolutely.
or anything else. Well, luckily for the Valley, and I have to even say luckily for Mark, the jury disagreed with Mark. After only 7.5 hours, they returned a verdict: guilty on all 6 counts. 2 days later, the sentencing phase began. The results were historic. Life for the murders of Vincent Beverly and John Bayer, life for each conspiracy count, and the death penalty for the torture murder of Jeff Green. Judge Sullivan later explained his reasoning with stark clarity. And he said, if you can't keep people from committing or arranging a murder while they're in prison, then the death penalty, in the nature of the case, I believe was appropriate. And that gives me chills. For Bridger Valley, the verdict marked the end of a decade-long chapter of intimidation. The trial functioned almost like a communal exhale, right? A symbolic cleansing. Rural justice systems depend on stability, and destabilizers like Mark, not only do they ripple through communities, they can ripple through generations. His conviction represented a reclaiming of order. Wyoming had never seen a case like this and hasn't since, honestly. Like, this really was kind of one of those once in a lifetime, hopefully, right, cases. Mark Andrew Hopkinson, once the charismatic hometown golden boy, now held a different title: the most dangerous man ever convicted in the state. And for the first time in years, the Valley was able to breathe.
Sorry not to get off on too many tangents, but maybe one thing about this whole case, maybe one reason Jeff's Jeff Green's torture and murder is widely described in coverage as one of the most brutal cases Wyoming has ever seen. And why that really created the reaction that was so strong. So I think it's because the coverage really said, like, this is one of the most brutal cases Wyoming had ever seen. And I think that's why the state reacted so viscerally and so strongly to it. So after Mark Hopkinson's conviction, the case did not slow. It simply shifted battlegrounds. What began as a rural feud that spiraled into a criminal empire now entered the appellate courts, where the stakes were higher, the scrutiny sharper, and the implications statewide. Wyoming's judiciary was suddenly responsible for navigating one of the strangest, most sprawling criminal records they had ever encountered. Years later, the Wyoming Supreme Court would summarize the ordeal with really raw honesty. Quote, "The facts of this case present one of the most bizarre stories in the judicial history of the state of Wyoming." And almost immediately, Mark began fighting to undo it. His appeal attorney, state public defender Leonard Munker, launched an exhaustive series of challenges, and they questioned everything: witness credibility, the scope of Hickey's immunity, jury selection, alleged prosecutorial misconduct, ineffective assistance claims, and whether a defendant who didn't physically commit a murder could constitutionally face the death penalty. These were foundational legal questions, and questions that realistically could overturn a death penalty sentence in the most notorious prosecution. But despite every exhaustive appeal by Mark Hopkinson and his legal team, after years, by 1981, the Wyoming Supreme Court upheld every one of Mark's convictions. But, plot twist, the court did throw him a lifeline. The death sentence was vacated due to technical issues in the penalty phase. So what does that mean? Mark Hopkinson would spend his life behind bars, but he wouldn't die for the crimes he had ordered. He would be alive to continue possibly ordering hits from within prison walls should anyone cross him.
Well, I'll see your plot twist, and I'll raise you a plot twist. And we'll have a double plot twist, because it is Wild Side. And here's the deal. Double plot twist, it did not save him. Period. Why do I say that? Well, I'm about to let you know. So, a new jury was convened in 1982. They heard the evidence again: the bomb, the murder chain, the witness killing, the manipulation, the violence orchestrated from prison, and again, they imposed the death penalty. This new jury again imposed the death penalty for the torture murder of Jeff Green. By this time, Wyoming had retired the gas chamber at the old Frontier. At the old Frontier prison. That just sounds like such a character name. Lethal injection became the state's method of execution. But I think that Bailey, I think you were onto something. What really haunted the appeals was the growing realization that even incarceration couldn't stop Mark from trying to kill. And here's the deal. My opinion, if he ultimately got by, quote unquote, got by with it, like if he skirted the death penalty, don't you know that he would have been like, yeah, baby, try me. You can't touch me. You know, like that's kind of how I feel. I feel that's how he would talk too. Court records revealed that while behind bars, Mark allegedly continued to solicit new murders, including plans to target Frank Reutz. his old adversary in the water dispute, right? Reutz's family and anyone with him, and even a Molotov cocktail attack on a shopping mall in Uri, Wyoming. I mean, golly, this dude just can't help it. Like, bless it, you know? I feel like the middle school song is "Can't Keep My Hands to Myself." And that's how I feel Mark is. Like, he just can't keep his fingers out of these murderous pies. And now, okay, to be fair, some allegations were dismissed, others remained unresolved, but their existence alone matters. They underscored a truth the courts could not ignore. And that is ultimately that Mark viewed prison not as a restraint, but just as an inconvenience.
Listen, we've established, homeboy Mark, that his identity was about like power and respect and control and domination and blah, blah, blah. But by this point, by the time Mark was in prison, it was his core identity. It was a lifestyle for him. And I just don't think it was, under the right circumstances, Mark Hopkinson would continue to orchestrate murders. Like you said, I mean, he had a finger in every murder pie that he could possibly get on. I mean, he couldn't stop.
And again, let's not forget that Wyoming had never really dealt with anything like this, which, you know what, Wyoming, let's just pause and say good for you guys. Like, that's really pretty sweet that you guys have gone this long with being a state and you haven't had anything like this on your doorstep. I mean, give credit where credit's due. Wyoming, you're winning. That's why your name starts with a W, because you're winning. And it's I don't know. Is it funny? Is it not funny? But whatever it is, Wikipedia refers to Mark Hopkinson as a proxy serial killer, meaning he never actually physically killed anyone. He just was essentially the Oz behind the curtain, orchestrating all of this terror and murder. So Wyoming courts had, again, never really been tested like this. And, I don't know, rural communities are just different, and they rely on the belief that incarceration restores order. I think a lot of people believe that. I think, yes, rural communities, but I really do believe that a lot of communities throughout the world really have a belief in the incarceration process, right? But Mark's reach undermined that assumption, and his ability to mobilize accomplices from inside a maximum security environment really blurred the line between institutional authority and the informal power networks that he had built over years. And truthfully, I mean, come on, this Bridger Valley was just exhausted. And 13 years of fear, rumors, intimidation, and uncertainty just takes a toll after a while. I feel like I'm exhausted. And we've only been covering this case for, a couple of weeks. And people they wanted closure. They wanted it to be over. They wanted to be safe. And they wanted the saga to end, period.
Well, unfortunately for Wyoming would sit through the saga for another 10 years. Throughout the 1980s, Mark's legal team pushed, like we said, every available avenue. Federal habeas petitions, stays of execution, challenges to jury instructions, disputes over mitigating evidence. Each filing was an attempt to reframe, reinterpret, or reopen the pathway from execution. But at every level, courts returned the same answer. The conviction stands, and Mark Hopkinson, you will be put to death. By early 1992, the legal road officially ran out. Every appeal had been exhausted. The governor refused clemency, and the execution date was finally set. After more than a decade of violence, trials, and appeals, the end of the Hopkinson saga approached, slowly, quietly, and with the inevitability of a story that could only conclude one way. So just after midnight on January 22nd, 1992, inside the Wyoming State Penitentiary in Rawlins, the final chapter of the Hopkinson story began. For the first time in years, everything around Mark Hopkinson was quiet. No courtroom battles, no back-channel plotting, no frantic phone calls spinning new plans. Just a last evening with family and a simple moment he hadn't had in decades. He shared his final meal, which was pizza and fruit, with his mother and a few family members. It was small, private, and strangely ordinary considering the chaos that had surrounded him his entire life. Mark declined to have any witnesses present during the execution. No reporters, no witnesses, no onlookers, just him.
At 12:35 a.m., under the harsh fluorescent lights of the chamber, the first drug entered the IV line. At 12:57 a.m., Mark Andrew Hopkinson was pronounced dead. Wyoming has not executed anyone since. Right before the drugs fully took effect, he issued a last written statement. Emotional, angry, and still insisting he was innocent, he blamed Jerry Spence by name and wrote, "They have killed an innocent man." And then, in true Mark fashion, he added, "Jerry Spence is a lying, manipulative piece of shit. P.S. I feel sorry for the Veyer family, but you got the wrong man. Forgive them, for they know not what they do."
You know, even at the end, Mark was framing himself as the wronged one. And arguably, that's just so consistent with who he was. Admitting guilt would have meant losing control. And as we've established, control really was his identity. You know what I mean?
I mean, yeah. I have to say, of the people that we have covered, this guy truly was, man, I don't even know, a tumbleweed, a spider web, a roller coaster of a person, and honestly, for the community, I don't celebrate death. Period. End of story. I hope you guys have always known that I say that and I feel that dearly. But for this community, it really was closure, and it wasn't a celebration. It was closure. It was safety. Wyoming barely uses the death penalty, but this case, it shook the entire valley for more than a decade. And people just, I think, again, they felt like it was over, and it was welcomed. The execution didn't undo what happened. It never does. It doesn't bring people back. It didn't bring back the Veyers. It didn't bring back Kelly. It didn't bring back Jeff Green. But for the Valley, for the investigators, for the attorneys, the people who lived with this saga for 17 years, it marked the end of the instability that Mark had created. And when the lights dimmed in the chamber, the long, violent arc of the Hopkinson case finally came to a rest.
To close this out, when you zoom out from the murder scenes and the phone logs and the courtroom battles, the Hopkinson case becomes something bigger than just a true crime episode. It starts to look like a cautionary tale, a map of how something so small, so ordinary, can spiral when the wrong person refuses to accept the limits. This entire thing started with a ditch, a water line, and a sewer hookup fee. That's it. Literally, that is it. That's small town life. Those disputes happen everywhere. But under characters like Mark Hopkinson, those everyday frictions don't stay small. They grow and fester and warp, and they absolutely metastasize into something violent that can swallow an entire community. The thing about Mark Hopkinson, and we've seen it through this whole case, is that he carried a bottomless sense of grievance. Every slight became a declaration of war. Every no felt like a personal attack. And once he felt wronged, the response wasn't negotiation or compromise. It was vengeance and domination. And it was, you're never going to make a fool out of me.
Yeah. And I don't know. It's always sad. All true crime is sad, right? There are always really awful aspects of it. But I think what is always so sad to me is this was a small town, right? These are not random people. This is not a drive-by shooting. This is, I mean, it's impulsive, yes, but it was planned and it always had direction and it was always personal. Like it was always somebody that you would bump into at the grocery store. And, you know, I think in a weird way, the Bridger Valley, this little rural place where everyone knows everybody, became the perfect environment for somebody like Mark. And that was, and I say that because he was able to bend people, he pushed people, he intimidated people. And I don't know, was it a little bit of, were people a little naive, right? Like this would never happen in a small town. This would never happen to us in a small community. You know, and small towns can be protective, but that same closeness can also, I mean, unfortunately can also hide things. And again, people were afraid, people depended on him, people saw pieces of the truth. And I don't think anybody really saw the whole picture, right, until it was too late. And I think we have to also remember there's a piece of it that we don't talk very much about. I think a lot of people still remembered him as that high school, you know, football, who's who, charming guy, right? Like they remember that. And that's their first impression. That's hard to let go of sometimes.
You know, and in the end, it forces us to sit with a hard truth. Mark Hopkinson orchestrated unspeakable violence. And in the middle of the darkness were the Vayers and Kelly and Jeff, the real people whose lives were taken and whose families carried a kind of grief that never fully leaves a community. And, you know, again, what's even worse is, to this day, there's no record of charges ever being filed against the two men who actually abducted and tortured Jeff Green. That's the final loose thread in this whole case, and the part that still feels so unfinished.
You know, it really kind of, in a way, makes me think of the Fort Worth missing trio, you know, and we talked about that, where it's like, man, it's in somebody's attic, it's in somebody's memory, it's at somebody's Thanksgiving table or in the corner of a room when you're talking after you might have, you know, I don't know, you had a moment of weakness, but somebody knows. Somebody knows something, and I don't know. Selfishly, I just wish that there was, again, a little bit more closure for the family of Jeff Green. But man, there's a lot, I think, to learn from this case. I think one of those big things is unfortunately, it can always happen to your community, right? And sometimes these nice communities, these cute communities, these smaller communities, they just think that there's like an invisible barrier, an invisible shield, and that doesn't really infiltrate them.
I don't even know if it's that. I think it even might be more of like a domestic violence dynamic, where you don't kind of realize you're in the cycle until it becomes very abusive and very explosive, and you start to walk away, and then you're like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
I didn't realize how toxic, how dysfunctional this was. And I think it's probably the same thing with stuff like this, right? But this was the first time, honestly, I had heard the concept of murder by proxy. I had never really heard that before. And, you know, I think this is the first case we did where it was totally murder by proxy, and the guy got the death penalty for it.
Yeah. I mean, it does give very like mob boss, you know, gangster vibes.
For sure. Yeah.
But, you know, and I don't know, right? Like, you know, some of these big, you know, Al Capone type of people, I can't remember all the ins and outs of him, but meaning some of these mob bosses that never actually got their hands dirty, right? They just orchestrated a lot of it.
Mm-hmm.
This really, you know, it kind of comes out of left field, right? That somebody was operating like this from Wyoming. right? Like, I don't know. It just seems a little out of place.
This whole thing is so like Yellowstone to me. Like the wild, you know what I mean? The small town reputation protects, you know, the players and how serious, not that you shouldn't, but how serious people take their property and their food and their water. And I don't know, man, but at least for everybody listening, if you are ever thinking about doing a murder for hire, you shouldn't, because look what happens. You can get the death penalty for it. I mean, other than like morally it's wrong, but you know, from a consequential perspective.
Yeah, you're gonna get caught, right? Like, I don't know. I feel like we haven't said find a better hobby in a while, and I think this is appropriate. You know, just find a better hobby or let it go. Man, just, dude, let it go.
Yeah.
All right.
And another ode to Skip is everything always comes out in the wash.
That is true. Lots of things come out in the wash. In the wash, you say? I always say, how do you spell that, Dad? How is there's an R? There's a W-A-R? And he's like, shut up, Chelsea.
The same thing with Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. He ends, or potato.
Potato.
Yeah, so very West Texas.
Yes.
Well, as always, you guys, thanks for hanging out with us through this wild and crazy 2-part of a ride.
And we'll catch you on the wild side.
Bye, guys.
Later, Gators.